Have you ever wondered how your sales performance compares against your competitors and peers? The B2B Sales Benchmark Report provides the definitive guide to what success looks like in 2021. See how you compare in terms of win rate, sales cycle, average deal value, relationships, and engagement. You can see the results and get the full report at ebster.com/B2B-sales-benchmarks. This is Sales Ops Demystified, the #1 most downloaded podcast in sales operations. We invite the brightest minds in sales operations onto the show to deconstruct the why, what, and how behind rep productivity, forecasting, metrics, and all things revenue. This podcast is brought to you by Ebster, the leading customer engagement platform for Salesforce. Hello and welcome to another very special episode of the Sales Ops Demystified podcast. We are joined by Zach Thigpen, currently Head of Operations at Augment CXM. Zach, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tom.
So Zach, we're going to be attacking sales operations from a slightly different angle this time. So Zach has a varied experience, venture partner, founder of his own business, but actually kind of has a more broader perspective on RevOps and ops in general. So we're going to be taking sales ops on from that perspective, and also Augment is at a relatively early stage. So we're going to see how we lay solid foundations for the revenue operations machine in the early days. Is that an accurate description of what we're going to be chatting about, Zach?
Absolutely. Sounds good.
Also, so let's kick off. First question, how did you come into the world of operations or revenue operations?
Yeah, so I've been a startup guy my whole career. That's always I've just been building skills there and building experiences in a variety of different capacities. So I kicked off my career after my undergrad building out a marketing department for, funny enough, a go-kart company. The reason that I ended up at that job was because it gave me the opportunity to go and build a department and do something that a lot of 22-year-olds don't get to do, as opposed to a lot of the more traditional startup roles for people that are straight out of undergrad that aren't technical. So for me, I got to build that department over 4 years as I was, we were going from 1 location to 5 locations, 2 million in revenue to 16 million in revenue. And it was a really good experience for me to learn how to manage resources and be scrappy, and also, try to expand that knowledge of how to build a department and have it be numbers driven, and be able to track data in a very analog business where people are walking in the door, and how do you figure out how they come in the door. So that was a really good experience for me. Then I ended up, I was working for a couple different startups on the side as well, just getting my feet wet in the more traditional VC backed type of startups. 3D printing was a big one for me. Ended up at Berkeley for my MBA program. I was very focused on venture capital while I was there, because for me, it was about building pattern recognition. It's, as you can see, I'm fairly data driven. So it's, what are good companies doing? How do you kind of identify what a successful company looks like? And then, was founder of a company from there. That kind of fell apart as we were about to go through Y Combinator. And then I joined Cobalt in the revenue operations capacity. And then a month and a half ago, I just joined at Augment. So I'm happy to go into my specific details at Cobalt and why revenue operations, I think, is very important, if you think that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think that's the next best step. So if we understand you've been in earlier stage companies and venture, and then what made you, or what drew you towards the RevOps role at Cobalt?
So I think revenue operations in general, I think is a really good way to go about, especially for startups, a really good way to go about building repeatability and scalability on the revenue side of the business. The reason I like revenue operations, and I will be founding a revenue operations team at Augment, as opposed to a sales ops team, is because and I was sitting inside the finance department. I think you can house it within the finance department or the operations department as long as it's not siloed within a specific marketing, sales, or CS department. The reason that I like that is because it's not siloed. So you're not playing favorites. You're really trying to spend resources and optimize for what's best for the company as opposed to a particular department. B is because I had access to all the data being in the finance department. So, I mean, I was building comp plans and I was pulling numbers out of our financial systems, and it was really important for me to have access to all that data and be closely tied to our finances, because as we all know, revenue and sales in general is a pretty big cost center for businesses. I mean, they're generating revenue, but they're expensive organizations to build. And so understanding what the expenses were was very important. And then 3, just creating alignment across the marketing, sales, and CS teams was critical for me. And that's why I think that's the number one reason why I think RevOps is crucial, is because you're able to have aligned goals, have a North Star goal, and understand that each of the departments is pointing in the same direction. And that's not only for the internal purposes, the operations purposes, but that's also for customer facing things. So the customer life cycle is they're having a complete and an experience that is consistent as they're being handed off from one department to the next.
Got it. And now at Augment, what's the current team size? I know you guys are relatively early stage, and what, if any, sales tech do you have in place?
Yeah, I mean, we're around 20. And so we have a couple sales guys, an SDR, a couple CSMs, one marketing person, but we're selling enterprise software. So marketing is a lot more branding right now and a lot more biz dev than it is traditional inbound marketing. So right now our tech stack is, we have a very clean Salesforce instance. Our CRO, who's very experienced, he's taken 4 IPOs. He's gone through 4 IPOs, and he built the Salesforce instance a little bit before I joined. Kept it very clean. We just moved our CS team out of Clubhouse, which is a little more engineering centric, but a very, very technical product. So it allowed us to be very integrated with the product team. But we moved out of Clubhouse into Salesforce. And the reason we did that is because it just gives, it's a little better built for what we need it for, which is account management. When you're dealing with enterprise customers, I think that's critical. And then I'm in the process of moving kind of creating our CS playbook and then putting that into Notion. And not just the playbook in terms of like plays, like, hey, what happens if a customer gets locked out of their account, but also like the customer lifecycle, the 365-day lifecycle, as well as like the QBR checklist and everything like that. So I think it's good to have that kind of outside of Google Drive and also in a place where it's not in Salesforce. Like Salesforce is for the day-to-day account management. This is for more onboarding someone, because right now I'm running our CS team, and so I'm building it out in a way that will be repeatable moving forward.
Got it. And we may have to go back to Cobalt for this next question.
Sure.
But also probably relevant for the work you're doing at the moment. Can you share an example where you've had something that you as the ops person wants to implement, but then the reps, whether it's CS or sales, didn't necessarily see the value, but you still had to try and influence them to take that on?
Yeah. The way I think about it is when you're in an ops role, it's a little bit of a give and take. You need to be thoughtful about that because oftentimes you're going to be asking people to add more process to their day-to-day. So you got to make sure that you're providing value and making their lives easier in some ways. So I would always try to, whatever projects I was doing, I would try to flip-flop. One project would be hey, us as finance, we're taking on deal desk and we're taking over invoicing from you guys, the reps. And now I'm going to put in, a system where I need you to close out any deal that hasn't been touched in 30 or 60 days or whatever it is. Right. So, I always would try to go back and forth like that. And also it's about people management too, right? So you need to build a good rapport. You need to explain why it's necessary, what you're building. But yeah, there's plenty of times when, I was blocked by management before implementing a QBR structure because we were onboarding a new CS person or new CS leader, and it just, we needed to kind of take a step back and reevaluate the full process and not just one piece of how the CS function looked. So oftentimes I've had more issues from the top level of departments rather than the individual reps. Generally, with individual reps, they are responsive as long as they understand why you need what you need, and that you make it very clear that process is a part of their job and it's a part of how they're evaluated, not just the number that they're hitting. So, it's always a question, with sales leaders or whatever, any revenue leader and operations is, what would you rather have, a rep that is at 80% of their number but follows process, or a rep that's at 150% of their number but doesn't follow process? So, that's always a hard question. There's no right answer there. But for me, I'm a process guy. So that's always the way I lean.
Got it. And right now in Augment, is there anything you're doing to drive productivity in these early stages?
Yeah. So, a lot of it is building out repeatable processes. And so right now, there's a lot of unique things with every customer that we have. And there's a lot of unique things with particularly our CSMs. And we need to kind of operationalize that and make sure, in order to move forward in like a repeatable way. Again, I keep using the same terminology, but a business is a business, right? If you're talking about B2B SaaS or B2B in general, like a lot of this operations stuff, a lot of this is going to be the same no matter what the actual product is. So right now, a lot of it is focused on documentation, and also I've stepped in, leading CS right now and being an advocate for CS between sales and product. And the way I look at it is, sales is being squeezed on one side by the board and the leadership for hitting a number, and on the other side for customer success. Customer success is being squeezed on one side by sales by saying, but for selling things that maybe we do have, maybe we don't, and on the other side by product by saying like, oh, we can't get this, or we have other priorities. So it's all about negotiations from the product, from the departmental leaders. And so right now, implementing processes and implementing realistic timelines for implementation and things like that is really helpful for how we're going to end up like getting to where we need to be and getting to that. Every customer has the same process and every customer is treated the same.
Got it. So what you're basically saying that it's important at this stage to make sure you have almost a service level agreements between departments. Totally. And all the processes documented so that when you do start adding 2 salespeople a week, you can handle stress.
And also, I think this is about optimizing resources too, because if your actions aren't repeatable and if people are doing different things within departments, and what happens when you hire a new person, and also, okay, so then are you able to kind of get economy of resources like SDRs, or do you need to hire, when you hire one more like AE, do you also need to hire a new SDR and a new CSM? But if you have good processes, you can probably get away with holding off those new hires for longer and longer. But it just depends on how you set things up and how you do things early.
Got it. And so right now your role because you're running the whole of the operation, right? Mm-hmm. So your role is you're actually perfectly placed in order to fit above all these departments and ensure that everything's working correctly?
Yeah, I mean, I'm wearing a lot of hats. So part of my role right now is I'm running finance, I'm running HR, I'm running admin, I'm running back office. It's
Mm,
early stage, right? So I'm handling a number of different things, but a big part of what I'm focusing on is making sure that we because I love looking at metrics, and especially David Skoke's SaaS Metrics 2.0. So I build an operations function and a revenue operations function from data on up. And right now, the data is a little too lumpy, and doesn't look it's not as helpful as I would like it to be. So the first thing I did when I joined is build KPI dashboard for every department, and especially focused on the revenue side of things. And so us being able to get to and some of that is like, hey, SDR and AEs don't spend 1 week doing outbound and then the next week doing nurturing. Like, try to keep your weeks fairly even so that the pipeline is fairly smooth in an upward trajectory, because that's going to help us moving forward. Because if you don't do that now, then when you're tripling the team size, you're going to have a super lumpy revenue cycle, and that's not scalable. Can't bring on temps in Q4 to close deals.
got it. So a lot of what I'm hearing is like focus on how this is going to look in every like 10 exercise.
Yeah.
Right. And we need to get that
Well,
right now.
yes and no. I think that the reality is you build the earlier you are. Right now I'm building things that'll hopefully last us 6 months. In a year from now, hopefully be building things that'll last us a year. But if you don't have the right foundations, they're very simple foundations, right? That people like reps or prospects should be moving through the pipeline at a certain velocity, and they should be hitting certain check marks along the pipeline before they get to the next stage, right? Those are things that are going to last throughout the life cycle of the company. And also, like, okay, SDR, maybe don't reach out to 600 people right now and then 50 the next week. Maybe spread that out and have that be 200 each week over the next 3 weeks. And so I think those are things that'll last for forever. But the way that me throwing all of our accounts into Salesforce, like, that'll probably work for now, but down the road we'll probably need to get Gainsight or another tool of that nature to manage CS.
Got it. Who's your next hire in the operations department?
The next hire is that's a good question. In the operations department, it would just be like, a junior me. So someone that would take on a lot of different things. But I would like to hire another CSM at some point, or a QA engineer, like maybe someone that is kind of more of a solutions architect / QA engineer, that is sitting very close in between product and CS.
Got it.
But those are unicorns. Those are hard hires to make. They're not cheap.
And so, okay, for next ops sites, it could be like a mini you to take some of the stuff so you can focus on solving bigger problems, I guess.
Yeah, I'm running these various departments right now, and so I just need another set of hands, really.
Got it. Forecasting sales, does that sit under you at the moment?
Sales?
Yeah, sales forecasting.
Oh, sales forecasting. I work closely with our CRO, who essentially is running sales. He's not running marketing or anything else right now. He's running sales, and we were just building out the forecast this past week, and that's a collaborative effort between me and him. And again, it's funny because I almost like want to buy different hats for me at work, so I can say, okay, now I'm taking off my revenue operations hat and putting on my CS hat, so that I can talk about the projections we just made and how that affects like our CS team. And so I was negotiating with him on our forecast in multiple capacities, but trying to basically keep it smooth and think about where the handoff happens, and how long sales stays in the loop, and who's responsible for setting meetings at certain times, like things like that.
Got it. And what right now, what are your favorite revenue related metric?
That's a good one. My favorite revenue related metric. Let me just look it up real quick so I can say it. It's called pipeline velocity. And I don't know, are you familiar with that?
I think that has come up once before, but I'm not sure if I'd be able to give an accurate description.
Okay, it's a great one. So essentially, it's the number of open opportunities, new opportunities, times the conversion rate, times the ASP, but really the gross margin ASP, divided by the average length of the sales cycle. And basically, if you break that apart, like what that number tells you is how much money, how much revenue is moving through your pipeline every day. And so if you multiply that number by 365, you should get a pretty clear idea of where you're at from a revenue perspective, how close you are, or how on track you are to hitting your number. And the interesting thing about that is if your number doesn't look as good, then okay, you can look at those 4 pieces and figure out, like, my last company, we had a sales cycle issue, hence why I was like having people close out deals earlier, but if you look at that number, that's essentially what it's telling
you. Got it. So just so I understand, so number of open opportunities, so all the opportunities you have.
New business.
New biz opportunities.
Yep.
Time to conversion rate makes sense. Times by I think, so you said ASP, I think that's same as ACV, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how you book. It depends on how you book revenue. I mean, you could also do ARPA, like if you're counting first year upsells, but I liked it. I think ASP is a good one there.
And what is that average selling price?
Yeah, average sales price. So ASP, and then I would do it. I like doing it gross margin.
Yeah.
Everybody's different. That you can kind of make this your own, but those are the basic ingredients for this formula.
Got it. And then divided by average sales cycle. So basically, if your CRO or head of sales comes in as like, oh, we're going to hit our annual target, you can just run them through that equation, and then that could give you a good idea of where you are.
Yep. And then you're like, oh, we don't have enough open opportunity, and then you're like, oh, we're not going to hit it. Maybe we don't have enough open opportunities. Let's have a sprint for new opportunities. Let's buy a bunch of Zoom info credits or whatever and get going there.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that has come up before, but we didn't go into that much detail. Fantastic. And then final question is about who in the world of operations has kind of taught you or mentored you the most in your career?
Mentored me the most. Well, I would say from a website perspective, David Skoke. So the SaaS Metrics 2.0 is definitely, what I build off of. But personally, that's a good question. I guess, I don't know if I have a good answer to that. A lot of it is just picking stuff up as I go. Yeah, let me get back to you on that.
No, I
don't have a good answer right off the top of my head.
So this guy, Dave, how do you spell his surname? It's David
Skoke, Skok.
Cool. I will link that below because it sounds pretty relevant to the audience. So
yeah, look at SaaS Metrics 2.0. I think is the best one to look up for there.
Got it. And he just details metrics that will be useful for measuring performance of SaaS companies.
Totally. Yeah, on the revenue side. You know what? I do have an answer for that last question. So, have you ever heard of the book recommended to all your listeners, Scaling the Revenue Engine by Tom Moore?
Nope, but I will do.
Yeah, so link to that too. Tom Moore is the man. He's really smart. He's writing a new book right now. He's kind of been building out, kind of this whole. But Scaling the Revenue Engine is specifically about the revenue, basically the revenue engine and the metrics that go into that and the operations that go into that. And he has a scorecard for like where you're at on 1 to 5 on all these different data sources and tools and things like that. And he's great. And he was nice enough to come and speak at a RevOps event that I put together not too long ago. So he's great.
Got it. Awesome. That was a nice session. Definitely a more like generic ops overview, which I think is good, because it got me thinking about a lot of stuff that I never heard of or discussed before. I particularly liked your point about the negotiation and give and take. And if you are going to try and get people to do stuff, like it's good to announce that when you are going to them and being like, yeah, we're taking away invoicing, for example.
Mm-hmm.
All the stuff about making sure you have the foundations in place, the processes and the relationships between departments in place for when you scale. But yes, as you said, maybe it's only relevant for the next 6 months because stuff changes so fast when you are at the early stages. And yeah, the other point, which I thought was quite profound, is that the operations stuff is actually quite the same for like any kind of business, or like SaaS or service business, regardless of what you're saying, which I never really thought about before. But actually, like a lot of the processes you could just lift and shift between different businesses if they are in the SaaS industry, right? So that's something that I hadn't really come across. Zach, that was really good. Thank you so much for coming on.
No problem. Thank you, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sales Ops Demystified podcast. If you are listening on a podcast listening application, then please subscribe, rate, and review. And if you have any questions about the show, if you know a guest, or if you have any questions about sales operations, just hit me up at tomhunt@ebster.com. That's tomhunt@ebster.com.